en los niños no dejo de pensar del conflicto en Gaza. Y es que el conflicto en Gaza no se detiene. Todavía los muertos continúan en aumentos y el número de niños asesinados ha subido a 609, si no me equivoco, desde que hubo el cese al fuego. Benjamín Netanyahu, el primer ministro israelí, visitó la Casa Blanca. Y pues parece que no se ve luz verde o luz al final del túnel, que esto va a seguir así y va el mundo a seguir presenciando lo que yo ya considero que es una masacre absoluta con una población.
Por eso creo que es importante entender, Camila, y hablar con alguien que estuvo allí, porque lo vemos tan alejado, lo vemos tan lejano, e incluso se está volviendo paisaje que tal vez los titulares ya no nos sorprenden, ¿no? Y por eso le traigo un invitado que creo que es muy importante a esta hora. Él es Morgan McMonagle. Él es cirujano traumatólogo, Camila, del Hospital Universitario de Waterford. Él estuvo hasta hace unas semanas, Camila, hasta hace unos días, allí en Gaza, trabajando en el departamento de cirugía del Hospital Nasser en Khan Yunis. Y los relatos que ha dado a medios como BBC hace cuestión de horas son realmente impactantes. Dr. Morgan, thank you so much for being with us here on Blu Radio.
Not at all. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Yo quisiera arrancar esta conversación con nuestro invitado Camila preguntándole cuál es la realidad, qué es lo que se ve, qué es lo que pasa en Gaza. Doctor, could you talk about what is the real situation in Gaza?
Well, it was my second time going to Gaza during the current conflict. I had been there a year ago in a field hospital between Rafah and Khan Yunis, which is in the south of the Gaza Strip. And almost a year to the day. And I returned there in February of this year, back to Nasser Hospital. And the interesting thing was, one of the big contrasts was that when I arrived there a year ago, it was the night that Nasser was being sieged for the first time by the invading forces. And then I returned almost a year later to see the same hospital still standing, and many of the staff who had been there. I feel the biggest shock to me was when I arrived. Last year we came in through the Rafah crossing in the south, and Rafah had not been invaded at that time. But we came back via Israel through a crossing called Karim Shalom, and we had to drive through a part of Rafah city, which a year ago was still standing. And the first thing that struck me was that how flattened and destroyed the city was, the buildings. No place looked in any way reasonably inhabitable for the people. The ceasefire had started. The last ceasefire had started a few weeks before we arrived. But within a few weeks, supplies and food was stopped coming in, including more aid workers. There were many other aid workers from NGOs who were not allowed to come in and couldn't replace other NGOs who were leaving. So over a few weeks, we saw a decrease in the sort of treatment and service we could give the people in Nasser Hospital and Khan Yunis. Food started to become a little bit less, although many of the NGOs had stockpiled and stored a lot of food and medicine, but little by little the quality and quantity of the food and supplies was decreasing. Most of our first 4 weeks there, because there was a ceasefire, we were dealing with a lot of secondary and tertiary and quaternary effects of the conflict. So maybe a lot of patients, including children who may have had surgery a year ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, 2 months ago, were now coming back with complications, wound complications, infected wounds, wound breakdown, a lot of neglected surgical disease, a lot of cancer that was neglected because it couldn't present through a normal health care system. So we're dealing with a lot of obstructive cancers, bowel cancers. Some of the cancers were very advanced, stage 4, and very little could be done. And we're also seeing a lot of the effects of the war, people coming with bowel obstructions due to the scar tissue or the adhesions that you would normally see inside an abdomen or a belly after
Mr.
having
Morgan.
had surgery.
Mr.
Yes.
Morgan, allow us to translate for a minute. One second.
Oh,
Lucas,
I'm sorry.
¿qué
Sure.
nos está diciendo el doctor a la pregunta de Gonzalo?
Bueno, Gonzalo le preguntaba a Camila cuál es la realidad de lo que está pasando hoy, 10 de abril, y por estos días en la Franja de Gaza. Nos dice el doctor, nuestro invitado, que es la segunda vez que él va a Gaza desde que estalló el conflicto el 7 de octubre de 2023. Que estuvo hace más o menos un año o un poco más en un hospital de campaña entre Rafah y Khan Yunis, esto en el sur de la Franja de Gaza, y que regresó hace unos meses, en el mes de febrero, al hospital Nasser. Y lo que nos dice es que uno de los grandes contrastes que tuvo es que cuando vuelve por segunda vez, entra a través de Israel, pues pasa por el sur de Rafah, y lo que se encuentra, Camila, es una ciudad absolutamente destruida, con los edificios completamente borrados del mapa y donde básicamente ninguna estructura se ve habitable. Nos dice también que cuando él llega en febrero, estaba vigente ese cese al fuego que se había pactado entre Israel y Hamás, que mientras él está allí, este cese al fuego se va, y que ¿qué empieza a pasar? Se limita el ingreso de suministros, de agua, de alimento, y también se empieza a limitar el ingreso de personal médico de ONGs. Entonces, que empezaron a tener problemas para tratamientos, por ejemplo, que algunos pacientes que habían tenido cirugías complejas en el último año, en los últimos 6 meses, terminaban llegando a este hospital con muchas complicaciones, justamente porque no estaban teniendo la atención médica necesaria.
Mire, yo soy una mamá de una niña de 3 años y además estoy esperando otro bebé en estos momentos, y cada vez que veo las imágenes de lo que está sucediendo con los niños en la Franja de Gaza me ha afectado mucho emocionalmente. Emocionalmente es muy duro y chocante, y yo creo que eso le pasa a muchas personas alrededor del mundo, y no me puedo imaginar cómo es para alguien que está en territorio, que está ahí en terreno viendo esto de frente. Y por eso le quiero preguntar al doctor, él y sus compañeros, ¿cómo están emocionalmente? ¿Cómo sale uno emocionalmente y psicológicamente después de estar en la Franja de Gaza? Doctor, I am personally a mother of a 3-year-old girl, and I'm expecting another baby right now. And every time I watch images of what is happening with the kids in Gaza, I am deeply affected. And I think that happens to a lot of people around the globe that are seeing these images through the media, through internet, through TV. But I cannot imagine what it's like for someone to be on the field, to watch this directly. And that's why I wanted to ask you, how are you and your colleagues, emotionally speaking and psychologically speaking, after being in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, no, you're right. And as a mother, you'll appreciate that 50% of the population in Gaza is under the age of 14. So any form of conflict is going to affect half the population that are going to be children. And then it's very easy to work out the mathematics of the rest, because the other 50% who are close to adulthood or adults, half of those will be mothers. So there's 75% of the population that, if in no way, are combatants, no way. So it's a very good question, because we saw before the breaching the ceasefire, we saw a lot of children, and although they started to put on weight very quickly, because anyone who's ever been on a diet knows that as soon as you stop your diet, you put your weight back on very quickly if you don't remain compliant. So we saw a lot of kids who had put weight on, but it was abnormal. They were protein deficient. So we were seeing protein deficient malnutrition. We were also seeing a lot of hypothermia. I personally, as a vascular surgeon, treated a number of children in February in the Gaza Strip, because it was quite cold. Even though it's a Middle Eastern country and desert, it gets very cold at night time. And I treated hypothermia and cold-related injury, frostbite, to very young children's feet, because the displaced population are living by the sea, by the coast, by the Mediterranean, in intense and makeshift shelters that it's very difficult for an adult to stay warm, never mind a child. We visited the Friends of Palestine hospital in Gaza City, which is the only pure pediatric hospital, I believe, in the Gaza Strip. And that particular week, they had treated 9 children who were referred to them with hypothermia. 5 died, 1 recovered and got discharged, and the other 3 were still in intensive care. So the effects on children are absolutely disproportionate compared to other conflict zones that I've been in, such as Ukraine.
Usted le preguntaba a Camila cómo están emocionalmente el doctor y su equipo, y le decía a usted pues que usted es mamá y que se afecta muchísimo al ver las imágenes, sobre todo de los niños en medio de este conflicto. Lo último que nos decía es que los efectos en los niños son desproporcionados, incluso comparándose con algún otro conflicto como el de Ucrania. Nos dice además que aproximadamente el 50% de la población de Gaza son menores de 14 años. Es decir, que cualquier tipo de conflicto, sea lo que pase en este territorio, pues va a afectar a una gran cantidad de menores. Nos dice también que ha visto a muchos niños, por ejemplo, con bajo peso, que cuando se les empieza a poder mejorar su alimentación, a darles una dieta, rápidamente pueden ganar peso, pero sobre todo porque tienen una deficiencia de proteínas. Dice también que hay muchos casos de hipotermia, porque pues esto finalmente es un desierto, viven además en refugios improvisados, en refugios donde es muy difícil poder mantenerse calientes, y que esto pues viven junto al mar, en la costa del Mediterráneo, y sobre todo siendo un desierto, en las noches son bastante frías. Así que nos dice sí, que el impacto en los niños es terrible, incluso comparándolo con otros conflictos como el de Ucrania.
Sí, yo le quisiera preguntar al invitado sobre los niños sobrevivientes a heridas. Aquí nos está diciendo los niños que han tenido hipotermia y que están en distintos refugios, pero cuando son heridos, ¿qué pasa con ellos? Dr. McMonigal, we heard about children who have been injured and then they survive. But you never know the conditions in which they survive or the kind of injuries and all the kind of injuries that they suffer. I would like to ask you about those injuries and how's the state of those children, their mental state and their physical state.
Well, children are always children. If those who haven't been affected physically by the war, and there are very few, you would see those children out playing. You would see those children out playing on damaged buildings, trying their best to be children. But you'd also see them doing adult work, collecting firewood, collecting bits of paper, going out and collecting water, for example, in containers to bring home, and food, perhaps manning a small market stall to sell some food or some wares to try and earn money. Those who are physically affected, again, disproportionately, it was children, because 50% of the Gazan population are under the age of 14. So when the ceasefire broke in the early hours of March 18th, we spent the first probably 20 minutes pronouncing people dead as they arrived, because the area in Khan Yunis that was bombed was the humanitarian area where people were told to go and stay because they would be safe there. That's they were told. But it was bombed, mostly tents, mostly along the coast, no shelter. And what happened is, if you're close enough to the epicenter of a bomb, you will die instantly. You'll possibly even be vaporized. If you're ever so slightly outside the epicenter of a blast, you'll be hit by shrapnel, and you'll get hundreds of thousands of pieces of metal at very high velocity flying. And the problem with shrapnel is it affects every part of the body: the head, spine, chest, abdomen, pelvis, limbs. All parts. There's no one part that's ever affected. And I would say we spent the first 20 minutes pronouncing people dead, mostly children brought in dead. Then you got a second wave of children who were severely injured, weren't quite dead, quiet, emotionally devoid of any life, but alive. And then you have to make a very quick decision. Are their injuries so severe that it's futile to do anything? And unfortunately, typical scenario will be a child whose brains are on show because they've had such a severe head injury. Otherwise, you then bring them straight to the operating room, and we spent the first number of hours operating on children. Many survived, many died. Many died on the table, and it is very hard to process that. Some people get very upset. To go back to your previous question, which I didn't mean to sort of avoid, but many people get very upset. Most of us, when you're in that professional mindset, you'll get on and try and do your very best. I think my overwhelming emotion was anger and guilt. Guilt that this is being allowed to happen, and as someone from the Western world, it's been allowed to happen. Many of the kids. Sorry, do you want to?
No. Go ahead. Go ahead. Many of the kids who are listening to you, doctor.
Yeah, many of the children who survived still had severe limb injuries, and almost many of them will end up with amputations because you have bone and soft tissue, skin and muscle and nerve and vascular damage. And when you have that degree of damage to a limb, even if you repair everything individually, generally the limb won't do well. And one thing that really struck me when we had the opportunity to go outside and drive around Khan Yunis, Rafah, and also Gaza City. When I was in the Gaza Strip a year ago, we had lots and lots of children with amputations, both lower limb and upper limb. I didn't see many children with amputations on the streets. So where are they? They're not all dead. So I can only conclude that they're at home, and we don't know how they're getting on. They can't go outside. They haven't got proper rehabilitation. They haven't got proper facilities. Meanwhile, the able-bodied children are on the streets doing adult work. So the whole society is flipped upside down because as your parents get older and older, these children become young adults, tend to look after aging parents. That whole societal construct is also turned upside down because you now have disabled children growing into disabled adults, can't earn a living, and have to be looked after by their elderly parents if their elderly parents survive.
Qué drama lo que nos está contando este doctor, y ya Lucas nos va a hacer la traducción. Dr. Morgan McMonagall, I don't know if I'm pronouncing correct your last name.
Yes, correct.
Thank you so much for accepting this interview, and thank you for narrating all what you saw in the Gaza Strip, that of course should be a shame for humanity right now. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Que nos dijo Lucas, porque la narración, de verdad, hagamos la traducción, es aterradora y muy dolorosa, que era lo que yo decía, que cuando uno ve las imágenes de lo que está pasando en Gaza y uno dice, ¿cómo nos olvidamos de la situación que está viviendo esa parte del mundo?
Es terrible, Camila. De hecho, empiezo por ahí. Nos decía que el sentimiento que él más tuvo durante todo este tiempo que estuvo ahí en Khan Yunis son dos. El primero, ira por ver lo que está pasando, cómo quedan estos niños expuestos en medio de un conflicto que no tiene nada que ver con ellos. Y segundo, también la culpa, el remordimiento de saber que hay países que están permitiendo que esto suceda y que no se está haciendo nada por detenerlo. Nos cuenta en una larga explicación, Camila, pues cómo terminan estos niños. Nos dice que ha visto muchísimos niños que terminan con amputaciones porque, claro, quedan en la mitad del bombardeo. Cuando explota el misil o explota la bomba, salen miles de partículas de metal que terminan afectando muchísimas partes del cuerpo. Se afectan huesos, músculos, nervios, y nos dice son muchísimos los niños que hemos tenido que amputar en medio de este conflicto. Entonces, finalmente cuenta esto, dice que es raro.
Se mueren en la sala de cirugía. Sí. La mayoría de los niños que están en la Franja de Gaza son personas menores de 14 años.
El 50% de la población, nos decía, es menor de 14 años. Y bueno, nos cuenta esto, nos dice que por supuesto es raro ver a los niños jugando como normalmente suele pasar porque los edificios están destruidos, quienes no tienen secuelas de la guerra. Y finalmente él resume en esto diciendo: lo que yo sentía ahí era ira, por supuesto, de ver lo que está pasando y de unos menores metidos en un conflicto que no tiene nada que ver con ellos, pero también culpa de sentir que hay países y hay personas que están permitiendo que esto esté sucediendo.
Y él decía, culpa de pensar que Occidente está permitiendo que esto esté pasando con una población y unos niños menores de 14 años que no son culpables de lo que haya sucedido en octubre con un ataque de Hamás. Nos vamos con las noticias del mediodía para actualizarnos de lo que está pasando hasta